for people that don't know you, just maybe like a brief background of who you are in relation to the fraternity, what you've, I guess, what you do now, and then we'll kind of jump into your childhood.
All right. Well, as you say, I'm Henry Villareal, one of the founding fathers of La Unidad, and it was a great honor to be a member of that founding group. But in looking back, I had a career in higher education mostly, and retired almost 3 years ago. But over the course of my career, I worked at state schools, private schools, and ultimately at a community college where I ended my career. And so each of those experiences really allowed me to be very much involved in helping ensure the success of students of color, and in particular Latino students. So a career of 30 plus years in education.
Gotcha. Your last job, you were the dean of the school, or what was your position there?
Yes, I was the Dean of Enrollment Services at College of San Mateo.
San Mateo, awesome. Henry, can you tell us a little bit about just your childhood growing up, how you ended up making it to Cornell University, being a Latino back in the 80s, like, you know, that's like almost kind of unheard of, right? Like coming from where you come from to going to Cornell, like an Ivy League in New York. And it's not like NYU where it's like in the city, you guys were up in the cuts, like, you know, so I'd love to learn a little bit about your childhood and how you even got to that point.
All right. Well, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, South Phoenix, and actually started out in a smaller town in Gilbert, Arizona, and a family of 6 children, 2 parents. Grew up in a 3-room house with an outhouse. We had indoor plumbing, but cold water only. So a very humble beginning. When I was 6 years old, just going into 2nd grade, we moved to Phoenix. And there we moved into what we called a real house, because it had 3 bedrooms, plumbing, indoor toilet, just a dramatic shift from what we were accustomed to. But along the way through elementary school and into high school, I did pretty well, largely due to the influence of my parents, my extended family. Both my parents had elementary school education, but they knew of the importance of education for their kids. And so I took them to heart in doing well, and yet having no one before me, having gone to college, I really didn't even consider going to college when I was in high school. And it was by a basic circumstance of having attended a presentation at South Mountain High School where a couple of Chicano representatives were talking about going to ASU. I filled out a card and totally forgot about it. I said, okay, done, over. And it was about 6 weeks before the fall semester of 1970 that I got a phone call from one of the representatives at ASU saying, we'd like to come talk to you about coming to ASU. So I said, all right, sure. We set up an appointment. They came to the house. When they knocked on the door, I told my sister, tell them I'm not here. I don't want to talk to them. She says, no. She lets them in. And lo and behold, 6 weeks later, I'm a student at ASU. And it was a challenge. I was in a program, an English class targeted to Chicano students. But beyond that, the university at the time was about 25,000 students. Now it's near 100,000. But at the time, all classes, with the exception of that English class, were in these large auditoriums. It was very impersonal. I didn't fit in. Luckily, I had a job, a work-study job at the College of Law, where my sister worked as a secretary. So I'd go to classes and go to work and go home. Didn't do a whole lot of studying, at least not as much as I should. You know, a friend would come knock on the door, hey, let's go hang out. Okay, sure, throw the books down and go have a good time. Ultimately, ASU didn't work out. After my freshman year, I was asked not to come back. Sat out a semester, went to the community college, got straight A's except for a B in PE, basketball and volleyball. I was
so Henry,
totally.
Real quick, so you didn't do well at Arizona State, but then you got straight A's at community college. Why is that?
The personalized attention, the smaller classrooms, teachers knowing me by name, calling me by name. It just made all the difference. And so I felt good. After flunking out of ASU, I was really demoralized. Very low self-concept. So going to the community college just changed everything around. But then a week after getting my report card, I got a draft notice from the Army. And this was right at the end of the Vietnam War. And being naive as I was, I thought, oh, it must be a mistake. I thought, oh, in another week, I'll get another letter that says, you don't have to go in. We made a mistake. But no, my induction date came and I went in, and it was the first time being away from home. But then there were about 10 of us from South Phoenix that got drafted, and we did basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where it's hot, but it's also very, very humid. Arizona's hot, but it's dry. So it was a whole new experience. But I think that's probably one of the best experiences I've had in terms of meeting people from around the country, helping me to become accustomed to living on my own, at least with the security of having a place to live and food provided. And so after the Army, I decided to continue school at New Mexico State. I wound up being stationed in White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. And then went to New Mexico State, heard about a exchange program with the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay. And having never been, for the most part, outside of Arizona, other than Missouri for basic training, and now New Mexico, I said, I want to see another part of the country where it gets cold and there's different seasons. And so I wound up going to Green Bay, Wisconsin. It was a one-year program, but then I enjoyed it so much, I decided to stay. Yeah. And wound up finishing up undergraduate school there in Wisconsin.
And quick question, what was the socioeconomic kind of like background of students when you were at ASU, when you went to community college, and then now at Wisconsin?
For the most part, those that I was interacting with were lower income. They were similar backgrounds to my own. Many first generation in terms of going to college. And so a lot of similarities in that regard. And in Wisconsin, I actually transferred from Green Bay down to UW-Whitewater. And that's where, to my surprise, I encountered a Chicano student organization. They were offering classes on Chicano literature, Chicano history, and I became very active with that organization. And like the fraternity that was established at Cornell, there was that support, there was that cultural background, that commonality of having that common, in this case, Chicano Mexican American background, and it really lent support to being wanting to be academically successful, being nurtured in terms of the Mexican background, the cultural background, getting together and having dinners and just supporting one another. So that was a big contributor to succeeding there at the university.
And Henry, you're Mexican?
Yes.
Where are your parents from?
Mexican American. From Texas. My grandparents were from Mexico. And my parents were born in Texas. Eventually they moved to Arizona. And that's where all my brothers and sisters and myself were born.
Do you know what part of Mexico your family's from?
Jalisco.
Nice. Okay.
So I've never been, but heard stories growing up about what the experiences were like from my grandparents in particular. So
And you grew up speaking Spanish, or was that not the case?
I did as a child. I wouldn't say I was completely fluent. It was a combination of Spanish and English in speaking to people within the family, within the extended family. Um, they would be speaking to us, the kids, in Spanish. Me, I would reply in half broken Spanish and English. Um, and so that was another factor in terms of my education back then, being that we weren't allowed, even at the time I was being educated, we weren't allowed to speak Spanish. Even as limited or broken as my Spanish was at the time, it was prohibited. And so the educational system in that sense was keeping me from appreciating my cultural background, language being one of the factors that was being denied to me. And so almost instilling in a demeaning way, something that should be acknowledged and appreciated. And so it impacted me in a way that took away from my self-esteem rather than building self-esteem for having another language and having a different culture. And in those days, that's the way it was. It wasn't an appreciation for a multicultural kind of education. It was more so still very linguistically oriented, very monoculturally oriented. And so, and that was actually an influence on my part to become an educator, so that I could in turn appreciate and help students appreciate the diversity of their backgrounds, the cultural richness that they bring to the classroom. And so ultimately, that's what I did.
And was there a division between, not being Mexican enough, being too Mexican during that time with other students?
To a degree, there was. At UW Whitewater, joining the organization, it was a MECHA organization, student organization. There were some students that were frowned upon because they didn't believe in, at the time, what was the Chicano movement. That's, again, for me, that is also what provided me an opportunity to continue with my education, because of the invitation from these two individuals to come to ASU. It was because of what they had been able to establish in terms of outreach and getting more Latinos to attend the university. But there were still some students who chose not to identify, but then at the same time, they were ostracized for not embracing that cultural identity.
And when you said you weren't allowed to speak Spanish, that was elementary, middle school, high school, college, or?
Primarily elementary school. Yes. Beyond that, I think there was sufficient confidence, a confidence that was building, and not necessarily listening to the teachers who said English only. And so it's a kind of a rebellion of sorts of again, still speaking in that broken Spanglish, as we often called it at the time.
Got it. So you finished school finally, after
Yes.
you kind of a roundabout kind of way, different schools. You finished, and then, did you know what you were going to do? What did you end up studying? And where'd you go from there?
All right. I wound up studying secondary education to become a teacher. Again, because I wanted to have an impact on students at the high school level. And my first job right out of college was as a resource teacher at a school in Racine, Wisconsin. And this was exactly what I wanted to do in terms of wanting to educate others. But in this case, it turned out that it was a program that was federally funded. It was a program to help teachers develop a multicultural curriculum. So I was working with 3 other teachers, and we were conducting 3-day workshops for elementary and secondary teachers on developing this more diverse approach to teaching their students. And in Racine, Wisconsin, there was a large Latino population that had settled out from the migrant stream. They would come up to Wisconsin, pick cherries and other crops. And a number of Latino families chose to drop out of the migrant stream and settle there in Racine, Wisconsin. So that was a surprise to me as well, to have all these Latinos in the area. But through the workshops, we would look at the books and help teachers realize how monocultural they were, and provided them with materials to help diversify their curriculum. And at that point in time in Wisconsin, bilingual teaching was allowed. And so we were helping teachers and to incorporate some of these various materials into the curriculum. At the end of that first year, we hadn't heard whether or not the program would be refunded. And so I started looking around for other opportunities, and wound up getting a job at the University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh. And I had already started my master's degree in counseling there at Whitewater. So I had about 21 units already completed, but then transferred up to Oshkosh because of the job there, and ultimately finished my master's in counseling there at Oshkosh. But at Oshkosh, I was a minority student affairs advisor to Latino students, largely Chicano students. There was also a Black minority counselor and a American Indian counselor. So had the opportunity to work with students, helping them succeed, dealing with a lot of the same issues I had dealt with in terms of most of them being the first in their families to go to college. And so after getting my master's degree, it had been about 6 years total living in Wisconsin, going to school and working. And so I started applying for jobs after I got the master's, applied for jobs in California and at Cornell. I had an interview at UC Irvine and at Cornell almost simultaneously. And I was tired of the cold weather at that point. First couple of years were great. It was so different, so new and unique. But after that third winter was coming on, I thought, oh goodness, here comes winter again. So after 6 years, I said, enough, time to get back to a warmer climate. The job opportunity came from Cornell, not from Irvine. So I had to give some serious thought to, do I want to continue to live in cold weather? I thought about it. And when I interviewed at Cornell, it was very interesting that there were a group of students that were actually part of the search process. And they grilled me good. In fact, I can remember one of the students, Annie Mejias, who I still keep in contact with on Facebook. And she said, how do we know you're not just coming to Cornell to have a name on your resume? Have this name on your resume. So, whoa. So I said, hey, look at my job history, the 2 jobs I've had. I'm really dedicated to helping students succeed. Ultimately, I said, okay, I'm going to accept a job at Cornell, and went up there, and it was a great experience. Being exposed to all these different students. I was accustomed to working with Mexican-American students, Chicano students, but now here I was with Puerto Ricans from the island, Puerto Ricans from New York, that politic there, the Dominicans, just a whole variety of different Latino populations. So it was a wide, eye-opening experience for me to be exposed to that diverse student population. And then coming to recognize as well that many of these students were coming from the inner city of New York and coming to this idyllic place in Ithaca, beautiful, beautiful area. But many of these students too were dealing with that disassociation of where they come from to this campus that is so beautiful, largely a white student population, many of them being the white students being very well off, so very different than the Latino student experience or backgrounds that these students were bringing. So as a counselor, I was working with students and contending with some of those issues. And to your question earlier too, some of the students of color, Latino students, the Black students, Native American students were questioning and in some cases ridiculing other students because they weren't enough. I didn't identify enough with their own backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. And so we had discussions about that during my time that I was there. And the fraternity was something that Hernando Londoño had initiated. When I started there, I was directing the summer enrichment program that Hernando was a peer counselor for. And that's, as I understand it, when he started thinking about establishing the fraternity was during that summer. And by the fall, he was able to get the fraternity established as a student club, not yet the fraternity itself. And so that was until the following semester of 1982 that the fraternity was established. But during that first semester, it was very much a learning experience for me. Again, learning to work with all these different Latino student backgrounds, learning to work within the office of COSEP, as it was called. That was the Office of Minority Education. Actually, COSEP was Committee on Special Educational Programs or Projects. But there was some friction between the Latino population and the African-American population. The director and the other assistant director were African-American. Much of the programming and funding was targeted to the African-American population because of the numbers. They had much larger numbers. And that's one of the things that I had to learn to contend with. But then it was also something that the students were pushing. They wanted more money for programming. And so ultimately, we got more money for programming at the students' insistence. They were a very politically astute group in the sense of demands. Maybe not the most effective in terms of being demanding, but at the same time, it ultimately proved effective. A challenging, but a very good learning experience for me there at Cornell.
Yeah, and so you were there, and how did you meet Hernando? Like, was it through that program that you mentioned?
Yes, through the interview process, hiring students to be peer counselors with that summer program. That's how I got to know Hernando. And then as well, some of the other founding fathers, met them through the umbrella Latino organization, La Asociación Latina, LAL, as it was called. That was the umbrella group for all the Latino student organizations on the campus. And the different groups, again, had different identities, again, in terms of their cultural backgrounds. But, there was SHIP, there was the Cuban Student Organization. Ultimately, there was a Mexican-American Student Association that got established. One of the members was from, who actually established the student organization was from Houston, Texas, Jose Contreras. A quick story about Jose. He wound up at Cornell. He took the bus from Houston, Texas to Cornell, first generation college student. Winds up at Cornell. I wind up picking him up at the bus station. I said, "Well, where's your luggage?" It got lost on the trip over. He said, "But I have a toothbrush." I said, "Okay, we'll get you settled in. We'll get you situated." And so here was a homeboy, total dress, the bandana, the sunglasses, the khaki pants, the Pendleton shirt. And here he is showing up at Cornell, and just totally out of his element. But he was strong enough to overcome that difference. But initially, he underwent a sort of transformation. He wanted to fit in. But then once he got settled, he went back to being who he was. And he said, "Well, where are the Chicanos? Why aren't they around here?" So, well, there's a few of us around. And at the time, Cornell did not differentiate ethnicity on the applications. The student directory was all just a list of names. And so he says, "Well, what can I do to start a Mexican-American student association?" Says, "Well, I think what we can do is we can go through the student directory and look for Latino names with addresses in the Southwest." And that's what we did. Came up with about 30 names, sent out a flyer to the students, posted them around campus, and he had a meeting and students showed up, and lo and behold, MASA, Mexican-American Student Association, was born. The group did not want Chicano in the name. They did not want Mecha. Most of them didn't identify as Chicano, and so didn't want that name as part of the group. But Jose was in the second line of the fraternity. Ultimately, he became an hermano as well. And so all these students, many of them were involved in the different Latino student groups, including the founding fathers of the fraternity were involved in LAL, some in MASA, some in the Cuban student organization, the Dominican student associations as well.
So, so Hernando had the idea of forming this group. What were people's ideas? I think, and I remember Hernando saying that his goal was to make it a fraternity. I'm very curious to know what were the thoughts of the other students about making this a fraternity, being that there were already like all these student organizations already on campus.
Mm-hmm. I think for most of the students who attended the initial meetings, and then those that ultimately continued and became founders of the fraternity, there was some hesitation of being the partying kind of organization, kind of the stereotypical image of the white fraternities and even some of the Black fraternities. And I was very adamant as the advisor to the group. I don't want you all becoming like these other fraternities, particularly the hazing, the acting crazy. And Nando was very adamant, no, that's not what I want this group to be. And he was very clear. I want to focus on Latino culture. I want us to learn about our backgrounds because we are so diverse. We're not just one group. We're not one Latino group. There's this diversity of backgrounds. I want us to help each other exceed academically. And I want us to be able to contribute to the community. I said, okay, that's I can get in line with you on that vision. And so he was very adamant. That's what we want to be about. And so I think in helping to promote those ideals, that's what helped to coalesce some of the other members to joining the group and being a part of this fraternity.
And he brought you in, obviously you were a faculty advisor, and I'm wondering if that was required to start a student organization.
Yes, you had to have an advisor to become a student organization. And so through having worked with him, or he worked for me as a peer counselor that summer, we got to know each other. And again, supported his idea for the fraternity, but again, at first was hesitant until he explained, this is what I want it to be. That right on, go for it. Let's have you get this organization established.
Yeah, and there was Hermano Jim Zybel, who was also a Cornell administrator. Can you tell us like the relationship with him as well?
Okay, I knew Jim from Wisconsin. He was actually on the search committee that hired me for my job at UW Oshkosh. And when I got the job at Cornell, he was working at a school in Illinois. Yes, in Illinois. And we were in contact, and I told him, well, I'm moving up to Wisconsin, up to Ithaca, New York, not back to the Southwest as I had planned. So shortly thereafter, I was at Cornell. He quit his job in Illinois and moved up to Ithaca, and then started working at Cornell with the financial aid office. And he too then became an advisor of sorts to the fraternity, because his background up to this point was also working in higher ed.
Gotcha. And so we have two, an advisor and administrator. Everyone else was students. A lot of them were engineers, and a lot of them were sophomores and juniors mostly. Maybe like a couple, like maybe a senior there. When this group was forming, how much of the formation came from, or influence came from Alpha Phi Alpha or other fraternities that were already on campus in the formation of LUL?
I think Hernando may have consulted with them. I don't recall having any direct contact with the other fraternities in terms of how they got established, so on and so forth. And in part because I had this stereotypical image of these fraternities, and for the most part, I wanted nothing to do with them. So I think really Hernando did the groundwork and the consulting with these other organizations in order to help establish the foundation, or at least learn the necessary steps to take even to just becoming a student organization at Cornell. So again, I think Orlando really took the lead in establishing and bringing this fraternity to existence.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, at the time, were you openly gay? Did people know, joining the fraternity, being gay in administration, being a Latino? I'm very curious how that identity played into the formation of the group, your involvement in the group, and just overall the climate for you at Cornell.
Okay. Let me preface it by saying that I was the only Latino administrator at Cornell at the time. I think there may have been a faculty member at Cornell at the time, but it was a unique kind of experience being the only Latino in an administrative role. So that in of itself was somewhat alienating. And thanks to the student groups, which basically was a part of my job, was to work with these student groups, they provided me so much support. Again, that commonality, the cultural backgrounds. Even though our backgrounds were Latino, they were still unique and distinct. You know, me being Mexican, many of the students being Puerto Ricanos, Dominicans, again, the gamut, Cubans, but they were my rock, they were my support. Though I had some professional colleagues as well that we would meet weekly to talk about the kinds of issues we were working with, contending with in our jobs, and or the issues students were bringing to us. So we were able to discuss ways of assisting students with particular issues. But that in itself was a challenge, again, being the only Latino. Being gay I was in the closet. Nobody, as far as nobody knew. I didn't tell anyone. Now they may have had conjectures, but it was not a discussion. It was never addressed. Totally in the closet.
And so, you know, the organization started, you know, you guys ended up, so the organization started, it became a fraternity. You started having lines moving forward. What was that like now that you were like, okay, well, it's different when you formed the group and you started it, but when you start seeing lines come after you pledging, that's when it starts to feel like, whoa, it's growing, it's a thing. How was that?
It was pretty exciting. And I can continue to emphasize no hazing, let's keep to the goals, to the vision that Hernando had. And it was so satisfying to see these, the guys in line, walking in line. Even I had a little trouble with that, but they're getting together, they're going to the library, they're going to go study, and then they would present their reports, learning about the culture, their backgrounds. It was really phenomenal. In fact, right now I'm getting chills just thinking about the dynamic that was taking place at the time, how exciting that was to see these young men learning about their roots and things they didn't know about their culture. And so I thought that was one of the beautiful things that Hernando came up with. I want the brothers to learn about their history, about their backgrounds, and that was just really phenomenal. And of course, the students at Cornell had the academic ability to succeed, but they still were contending, many of them contending with this monocultural kind of existence. And so the support that the fraternity provided and the ability to get to know, to learn about the resources available, particularly the engineering school, such a rigorous curriculum, but the caballeros supporting each other, leaning on their hermanos to help them out, to help them succeed. Again, phenomenal kind of opportunity. It was great to observe. Just incredible, an incredible part of my experience as a professional, as an educator, as a counselor, and then having the trust of so many of them to come and see me personally with issues that they were contending with, aside from the fraternity, just personal kinds of things, and that they trusted me, even though I was so actively involved with them in these student organizations. They still saw me as someone that they could come to and trust and know that what they shared would be held in confidence. Just a phenomenal experience for me as an educator.
And so now, let's say a couple of years go out, and then now there's interest coming from other schools. What was that like?
Much of that didn't really evolve while I was there. I was at Cornell for just under 3 years. So the fraternity was established in '82. I left about a year later. I left in July of '83. And so the fraternity, for the most part, was laying its foundation still there at Cornell. It had become pretty solidified, and there may have been some initial inquiries from other schools, and in part because we traveled to, not so much for the fraternity, more so with MASA, the Mexican American Student Association. We traveled to some of the other Ivy League schools for the Thanksgiving holiday celebration, since many of these students who were part of MASA couldn't get back home for the holidays. The Ivies had established a pachanga, and they rotated the schools. And so I got to go to Yale and to, maybe it was Harvard, two different pachangas to, where all the students got together or got put up in their homes, apartments and such, and spent the weekend together and celebrating Thanksgiving. But word was getting out about the fraternity. But again, by the time I left, no other chapters, to my knowledge, had yet been established.
Yeah, and with this event, being that people were going to all these different Ivy Leagues, was that kind of a way where people were hearing about OUL?
I think that was because of Jose, the student from Houston, who was a part of the fraternity and pledging at the time. He was disseminating information about the frat, and of course about MASA too, and how he got that established. But yeah, word was starting to spread.
Got it. Okay. And so, fast forward, how did you end up coming back to California?
When I left Cornell, I got a job at Stanford with the MBA program as a recruiter, focusing on recruiting students of color. And it was a challenge. The job was a challenge in that my first 3 jobs had all been directly related to working with students of color in programs targeted to students of color, to minority students. Now at Stanford, I was in an office that was much more generic, even though a large part of my responsibility was to recruit students of color to the MBA program. I was the only person of color in the office. So it wasn't a minority affairs office. It was an MBA admissions office. And I had some challenging times trying to fit into that environment. But fortunately, there was a professor, a Chicano professor, Professor Porras, who I was able to gain support from, because my boss at the time, we weren't seeing eye to eye, and he helped me realize, look, she's been here for a few years, hang in there. She'll probably be leaving at some point soon. Sure enough, so she left. And one of the things that kind of got us off on the wrong track is when some alumni, Latino alumni of the MBA program, wanted to establish an alumni group, a Latino alumni group. And so we had a meeting. They came up on a weekend, and we had a meeting with my boss, and they were asking about the numbers of Latino students in the MBA program. And I said, well, they're still very low. And I said, in fact, when I first started here, I was flabbergasted at how low the numbers are. And the look on my boss's face when I said that, I thought, oh, shit. So from then on, our relationship was not the most positive. But at the same time, I was there to do a job. And so it was to recruit students, and it was to address the reality of look at the very small numbers of not just Latinos, but students of color in general. So it was just under 10% when I started working there. When I left, it was up to 25%. So I did my job despite the challenges. It was, it's part of that professional growth that one undergoes. You have to deal with the good and the bad. But I stuck to my principles, and in the end, I did my job. The numbers increased.
Nice. And then where'd you go after Stanford?
After Stanford, that's when I wound up going back to Arizona to work at Arizona State, directing the minority student retention program in the College of Business, and was able, with a staff member, to establish a course that focused on helping students succeed in the College of Business for students of color. And that was very successful. And after a year, my boss at the time, who was an associate dean, asked me if I would, in addition to my current job, and for no increase in salary, oversee the MBA program. And I said, okay, sure, I'll do it. And again, similar kinds of responsibilities, more so now overseeing the program itself, but now also trying to increase the number of students of color in the program. So similar success with increasing the numbers. It was challenging at first, but he had my back in terms of dealing with the administration and helping others to recognize that you can't go by test scores alone. Let's look at where people are starting from. Many of them being, first generation undergraduates, and now we're trying to get them into a graduate program. And so, again, equally successful in increasing the numbers, increasing the overall efficiency and organization of the MBA programs. So had a good success with that program as well. But again, it was interesting that I came back to the same institution where I had, as a freshman, failed out of the program. And 3 years into my role at ASU, I started my doctoral program. Because one of my staff started the program and said, oh, come on, you should join us in this doctoral program. Actually, 2 of the staff were in the same program, but I had to wait a year because it was a cohort-based program and it had already started, so I had to wait till the following year to start the program. And so a year after I was in the program, I had about a year left of coursework. And I met my future husband in San Francisco. It was so hot in the summer. I said, okay, I got to get up to the Bay Area to cool down, get away from this heat. Met Mark, and a year later, we committed to being with each other, but I said, I have another year of coursework to complete. At the end of this year, then I'll move up to the Bay Area with or without a job. And so that year ended, I finished my coursework, didn't have a job, but the one thing I needed was health insurance. He could provide me health insurance. So sure enough, packed up my bags and moved to the Bay Area. Took me about 8 or 9 months to finally find another job. And in the meantime, I was supposed to be working on my dissertation, which I found was more difficult than I anticipated because I no longer had the support network of my classmates, my colleagues, to support one another. But then I got a job, a horrible, horrible job at, I don't know if you heard of the Heald Colleges. They're a proprietary school. And I was a dean of the evening program. And I learned that this was really a school. It was, I was with the technology part of the school. And for the most part, they fabricated what they would be able to do for students once they graduated. It was expensive. These students were taking out loans to pay for school. Ultimately, after 9 months, I got another job and was able to get out of there. That was really, as I say, a horrible experience. But I've been in the Bay Area ever since, and that's 23 years now. My husband had been married for 23 years. Initially, we were domestic partners. Then in San Francisco, they started allowing gay marriage. We got married in that period of about 4 months before Prop 18. What was it? Anyway, the population, the California population passed a law that did not allow for same-sex marriages, but we were in that window, and our marriage was, those marriages were considered legal. And then finally in 2015, I believe it was, is when, it was Prop H, got overturned, and marriage became legal in California. So we had another ceremony to celebrate our marriage. And so, but as I said, we've been together for 23 years now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm guessing the Bay wasn't a place that you thought you were going to end up at.
Correct. I never wanted to move back to Arizona in the first place, but the opportunity was just a good one at the time in my career. And I remember at the time when I saw the job description, it was like it was written for me. I knew I would get an interview. I'd get a free trip home to go visit the family. And so I go through the interview. After the interview, I go, that went too well. They're going to offer me the job. So I got to come up with reasons not to accept it, because I don't want to move back to Arizona. But after going back and forth, and he kept coming, okay, we'll do that. We can do that. We can do that. I said, oh my goodness, they really want me. So I decided to make the trek back to Arizona. And after 5 years, moved back to the Bay Area, by circumstance of having met the man that I'm spending the rest of my life with. So. I've lost the signal.
Sorry, there you go.
There we go. Okay.
As the fraternity was growing, were you just kind of watching, from far away and just seeing how things were going? Were you checking in with the chapter? Like, what were you doing at that point?
I had lost contact with the hermanos. Periodically, there might be a connection, but there was no ongoing connection with the fraternity. I had heard that it was growing, it was expanding, which I found pretty amazing that there were chapters all over the country. I don't think Hernando, and certainly not I never expected that it would grow, that it would expand the way it has. But over the years, it was a periodic and often contact that just happened one way or another. But then when the 35th anniversary was coming up, the founders were contacted and asked, can you attend? Let's all see if we can attend. And I got all excited again. Wow, I can't believe 35 years. Oh my goodness. And I hadn't seen some of the hermanos for 35 years. And so when I saw them in person, of course, most of them had gray hair, just like I do. And so it was, wow, I remember you when you were students at Cornell. And it was a great conference, celebration, reuniting with the hermanos. And for the first time, coming out to them in person about being gay, totally supportive. It was so affirming to have that reaction from them. And so Very, very positive.
So that was the first time, was on the 5th anniversary in New York City, was when you told them that you were gay.
Yes.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yep. And
I Go ahead.
it was just, and as I said, they were very reassuring. They said, well, where's your husband? He says, well, he's back in California. Well, why didn't he come with you? Well, I wasn't sure how people would react. So, oh, come on, next time you got to bring him along. And so I said, okay, thank you. That feels really good. So, so the times have changed so much, of course, but still, it was like a time capsule. I still recall, being an hermano with these guys, being their advisor, their counselor. Back to '83, that was the last real face-to-face communication we had. So that was still my history with them, and so I had no idea how they might react. So again, very reaffirming when I did come out to them.
Yeah. And so you're in the Bay, and then you find out about Berkeley. Like, how was that? Like, I don't know if I contacted you, I can't remember, but then you found out Berkeley, we expanded all the way up to the Bay. What was your reaction?
Right.
How'd you hear about that?
First, I was amazed. I don't recall if it was you that someone contacted me. It may have been you, I don't recall, but about trying to get together and have a lunch or a dinner. And ultimately, we came to agreement on a date and time at a restaurant here in Alameda. And it was just such a rewarding experience. Again, kind of reliving this experience with a new set of hermanos, getting to know them, learning of their experiences, sharing with them my background and my experiences. Again, just very rewarding to have that connection and to see these young men at Berkeley, students at Berkeley, all succeeding, and just a fantastic experience to have that reconnection with the fraternity.
That's awesome. And it was surprising for us to hear that there was, a founding father in the Bay. Like, I was not thinking that was going to be ever a thing. Again, I didn't even think bros would be coming to the Bay, but obviously San Francisco being the tech hub that it is, obviously it makes sense that a lot of people travel to San Francisco, and that there would be people living here that from the other parts of the country, not just California, or residents from California.
Mm-hmm.
Hence why you came, and just in general, right? Well, yours was more of a partner, but a lot of people have been moving here because of technology. And so,
right. Mm-hmm.
Not a surprise now, that what we're doing. So very exciting. Is there anything else, maybe questions that I didn't ask, or things maybe that you'd want to let people know? I want to show this. I'm going to send this out to all the alumni in California, all the undergrads. So anything else that you want to say or mention before we end it?
I would say I'm very proud to have been a contributing member to the founding of the fraternity, but very proud of the young men at the time who got together to become a part of this organization, not knowing how it would expand, the impact it would have on so many young men's lives, and yet adhering to the founding purpose as Hernando had laid it out, to learn about one's culture, to focus on academic success, and to reach out to the community. It's phenomenal that the organization has maintained its foundation, and that continues to be a part of the fraternity. And to know that that it has made such a difference and helped so many young men succeed academically and to gain pride in their cultural roots. That is so amazing, so satisfying that the organization has provided that kind of opportunity for people. And lastly, I would say, now that I am retired, any activities in the Bay or Zoom meetings, whatever it might be, I will make myself, I will commit to being more visible and be more active with any kinds of activities that may be taking place.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, now, well, there's no excuse. You're retired and no one's going anywhere.
That's right. Yeah.
And to a point that you made, Henry, about the roots and the, honestly, it was the indigenous kind of foundation of the fraternity that I would say was very appealing for us at UC Berkeley in founding of the chapter, of being able to be able to understand our history, and being able to like just research that and feel like we were part of our ancestors, and we were we were essentially reliving that almost through our pledging process, and honoring them, and that to us was very powerful. And us being Mexican, some of our family members, if you go back enough, we have indigenous roots. That to us was very powerful, and we were able to resonate with that so much as well. So Hernando did a great job and had an amazing vision that connected a lot of people, and has changed, like you said, many lives. And then here we are, years later, on a Zoom call.
Right.
So awesome. Well, thanks. Thank you, Henry. Thank you for your time. And I wonder what's going to happen once we send this out. I don't know if bros are going to start contacting you. I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see.
All right. I'm available, so I'm throwing it out there.
Awesome.